Today on an all-new Dr. Phil. The Zimmerman trial is over, but the drama
Did the prosecution blow this case?
is just beginning.
The one key eyewitness was killed by Zimmerman.
Trayvon's parents,
You just don't plan to bury your child.
George Zimmerman's best friend,
Is he a racist?
Absolutely not.
Reactions to the verdict.
Black parents right now are saying, my God, I can't even send my kid down the street for some Skittles.
Did the justice system fail, or did the prosecution just fail to prove its case? Two people who have opposing views about why the jury came to a not guilty verdict are criminal defense attorney Mark Eiglarsh and journalist and host of TV One's new show, News One Now, Roland Martin. Gentlemen, thank you both for being here. Mark, you say the only legal conclusion was not guilty. Why?
Well, let me just start off and say that I was angry at first because I believe that, and I still do, that Zimmerman is responsible for Trayvon's tragic demise. I am a father of three, and I feel for the family. But trials, as you know, Dr. Phil, more than anyone, they're not about the truth. It's what the prosecution can prove. And ultimately, these jurors found reasonably that while he was on his back suffering those injuries, and with the impending injuries that he could have sustained through this beating, that the only verdict that spoke the truth, that self-defense was a reasonable hypothesis of innocence, was not guilty.
What, in your opinion, is George Zimmerman guilty of?
Legally, absolutely nothing, because the prosecution did not have proof beyond a reasonable doubt that he wasn't acting in self-defense, and they were hindered because either he killed the only other eyewitness in cold blood, or, as the jurors found, he reasonably feared death or great bodily harm.
I understand self-defense, but if you precipitate the encounter, it seems to me that self-defense becomes a much weaker argument. Roland, what do you think?
Look, I agree 100%. And it amazes me when people say that, well, this wasn't an issue of race, when what precipitated this entire thing was George Zimmerman seeing Trayvon Martin, labeling him a suspect, calling 911. Was he peering into cars? No. Was he looking into apartments? No. He's simply walking down the street. I don't care what anybody says, George Zimmerman came to a racial conclusion. Young black teen is him, in a hoodie, suspect. And that's what started this whole deal.
Let me just say this. I'm not going to get into the mind of Zimmerman. I have no idea whether he followed him because Trayvon was black.
How would you feel? You said you have kids. How would you feel if you got a phone call and said, sir, I need you to come down to the morgue to possibly identify your son? Are you going to sit there and say, there was possibly a fight, but the guy could have gotten in a fight with my son.
No, you
my
want
son
me to
could have slammed his head. No, you are going to sit there and say, I seek justice. No, I'm being very specific. Dr. Phil, when you say he could defend himself, this is when they say there's a law and an unjust law. And that's why I said I would hope the reaction, the protest, would stem to a change in laws. I would hope there would be
legally allowed to carry that
It doesn't
weapon.
say that. Here's my thought. We know that George Zimmerman should never have gotten out of that car. We know that the whole definition of neighborhood watch is just that, watch. You're to watch.
Yes.
You're not to intervene. We know he should not have been carrying a gun on that watch. I don't care if he had a license to carry a gun. A teacher could have a license to carry a gun, but that doesn't mean they should walk into the classroom with it strapped on their hip. So here we know we've got a guy that got out of a car when he shouldn't have gotten out of a car. He engaged someone that he was supposed to observe when he shouldn't have been engaging them, and he was carrying a firearm on a neighborhood watch program. Did the prosecution blow it by not making it clear that he set up all of the conditions where things then did go wrong, whatever happened?
Absolutely.
No, I don't think that they blew it at all. I don't think that they blew it. Let me make clear. They did the best they could with the evidence that they had. Now, understand something. You are legally in Florida allowed to follow someone. The court of public opinion, no, you can condemn them all you want. But in Florida, under the Gibbs case, you're allowed to follow someone. You're even allowed to confront them verbally Where you cross the line is either you use force or the threat of force physically. Then you lose your self-defense protection. But there was no evidence to show that Zimmerman came out with his gun, which he might have, or physically harmed Trayvon initially, which he might have.
There should be a change in the law because you should not be able to do what he did and then all of a sudden say, we got into a scuffle, I shot and killed him, I was defending myself.
If this was my child instead of Trayvon, you would have to hold me back. I would want to kill Zimmerman. It would take every ounce of energy for me to not wind up in prison. And I look at the Martin family, and their courage is extraordinary. Their strength that they showed, I don't know how they did it. But I wouldn't want the burden of proof lowered to get the guy who killed my son. I'd want it, but I would hope that that doesn't happen, because the minute we lower the burden of proof for Zimmerman, for Casey Anthony, for OJ, whoever else you think might have gotten away with it, then when you're arrested, that burden of proof is lowered, and we all suffer.
Okay. Should the law be changed? Should there be change in the law, Mark?
But Roland, Mark makes an excellent point here, and I can tell you, having worked for many years in the court system, we sometimes judge these juries without understanding what their limitations and instructions are, because this standard of reasonable doubt, the prosecution stands up and says coulda, woulda, shoulda. That on its face is admitting reasonable doubt.
Yes.
George's best friend says that George did what he had to do to defend himself. Here's what he had to say. Was this an all or none situation? Did he have to pull that trigger?
I believe 100% yes. It was a matter of we're within an arm's reach of each other. I was struck in the face. I fell down on my back, and in no time, his knees are up here by my ribs, and he's pummeling me. There was no option.
Do you believe if he hadn't had that gun and shot Trayvon, that George Zimmerman would be dead today?
I do.
Absolutely.
So you think Trayvon would have killed him?
Absolutely.
I think so.
The judge says right off the top, a killing that is excusable or was committed by the use of justifiably deadly force is lawful if it's done while resisting an attempt to murder or commit a felony upon George Zimmerman. And under the stand your ground law, then if he's attacked, then he fully has the right to defend himself, even with deadly force, if he has a perception of threat. Is that correct, Mark?
Wow.
Yes, however, we have to make a distinction. What you just described is what every state except Ohio essentially has. It's standard self-defense. The stand your ground is getting a rotten reputation because it was initially threatened to be used. It was not used in this case. Stand your ground would have meant that he had immunity before trial. The defense didn't go that route. And stand your ground also stands for the proposition, let me finish, that you do not have to, you don't have to escape from the harm. In this instance, he was on his back. Both sides really didn't address that issue. He couldn't have gone anywhere. So stand your ground was not an issue in this case.
Dr. Phil, it is a problem. It is a fundamental problem. Many of us had no idea about the extent of stand your ground laws. My greatest fear, Dr. Phil, is that we are essentially telling black parents, you need to send your kids out wearing tuxedos and bow ties because somebody else will look at them and make a judgment of them without even knowing them, without them even doing anything. And parents, black parents right now are saying, my God, I can't even send my kid down the street for some Skittles and iced tea because somebody may end up killing them.
Coming up.
Bag of whatever you want.
Roland, what are your thoughts?
I find the defense to be utterly idiotic and pathetic to say he was armed with a sidewalk. Show me the last time a sidewalk discharged a bullet. That's utter nonsense.
Okay, let me ask you both, do you think George Zimmerman has any chance of ever leading a normal life after this verdict? And do you think that his life is perhaps in danger?
In terms of his life being in danger, you might have some vigilante out there. I hope no one ever does that because I don't believe in taking anybody's life. But yeah, he actually can live a normal life. Unfortunately, Sabrina Fulton and Tracy Martin will never ever be able to say the same thing about their son Trayvon living a full life because George Zimmerman is a murderer.
I disagree about him being able to live a normal life. I define normal as maintaining my serenity, which includes walking down the street without having to look over my shoulder, without worrying who's going to put a bullet in me, and he will forever, rightly or wrongly, always have a lack of freedom.
I would have loved if Trayvon Martin could have been able to actually do the exact same thing if he could have been able to walk down the street, and not look over his shoulder.
He
and
shouldn't
guess
have
what?
died, Roland.
And he died at the hands of the man. So you know what? Maybe the sentence of George Zimmerman is that he's going to have to live this life because it's a life that he created. And it didn't have to be this way.
I don't disagree with you that his actions set in motion the death of Trayvon Martin, and I'm just saying factually he will never have freedom.
Well, certainly Casey Anthony has not lived a normal life since that acquittal. O.J. Simpson has not lived a normal life since that acquittal. I think both of them have been greatly impacted by it, even though they skated on the charges. Mark, did the system fail in the Casey Anthony case?
No, the system worked the same way. I disagreed with the verdict, just like Roland disagrees with this verdict, but they had to find her not guilty because the evidence was not there, the same way the evidence was not there here.
Roland, do you agree?
I believe the system failed when you have unjust laws that are allowed to remain on the books to allow folks to sliver through. Absolutely.
Did the system fail in the O.J. Simpson case?
Well, first of all, in the O.J. case, the criminal system failed, but the civil system worked. It's all the same system, just different departments.
I want to read you a comment that juror B37 made. I think he was frustrated with the whole situation in the neighborhood and with the break-ins and the robberies, and they actually arrested somebody not that long ago. I mean, I would feel comfortable having George, referring to on a neighborhood watch program. I think he has learned a good lesson. Now, at that point, the juror was asked, do you feel sorry for Martin, Trayvon Martin, and do you feel sorry for Zimmerman? And the answer, and I'll paraphrase to save time, was the juror said, I do feel sorry for George Zimmerman because of the situation he got himself into.
Correct, but Dr. Phil, I've had numerous verdicts where my clients are acquitted, but jurors wait for us outside the courtroom and say, you shouldn't have done this, you shouldn't have done that. In other words, a not guilty verdict doesn't mean Zimmerman did everything right. Hell, some of them might feel, and this one juror doesn't speak for all of them, some might have actually felt that he did something really wrong. But the question is, legally, did the prosecution meet their burden? And they did not, and so legally they had to find him not guilty. The Casey Anthony jurors, many of them cried in having to find Casey not guilty.
All right, now, Roland, let me ask you this. Do you believe, flawed as it is, that the jury came up with the only result they could, given what the prosecution put before them?
The jury made its decision. I simply disagree with the decision. It is bad. It is unjust.
Coming up, we'll hear from George himself, the only man who truly knows what happened that night.
That you're sorry for taking the child's life.
Mark, do you think that Trayvon's parents will file a civil suit, and do you think they should?
I understand their desire to have cross-examination. My concern is they're going to have to pay the attorney's fees if they don't prevail, and go through all the emotion, the toll that it takes on them. I don't know, it'd be their personal call.
The one piece that continues to be a problem is that because Stand Your Ground was included in the jury instructions and he was found not guilty, there is a belief that he may be very well protected via immunity as a result of the Florida law, and that's why that law must be taken off the books right now, because it prevents people from having a fair hearing. That law is wrong, it is bad, it is unjust.
I want to thank you both for giving us your great opinions here. I mean, it has helped us so much, and I think it helps people understand both sides of this.
Thank you for having us on.
We'll be right back.